The first time they saw her, she didn't look like trouble. She just looked small. It was late afternoon in a tired American town that had seen better factories and better years. The sun hung low over Main Street, turning the faded brick buildings the color of old pennies. A rusted pickup limped past the diner. Church bells rang the hour, but no one really listened anymore. On the edge of town, at the end of a cracked frontage road, the Hellsangels clubhouse sat in an old warehouse that used to store farm equipment. Now it stored bikes, memories, and men who had more scars than photos on their walls. The big roll-up door was half open. Inside, a handful of bikers were working on engines, arguing about carburetors, and pretending they were younger than their knees said they were. Steele, the chapter president, was under a bike when he heard the door creak. He didn't look up at first. People avoided this place unless they needed something, and most of the time, what they needed was either illegal or stupid. He was used to that. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong in a motorcycle shop. A small, shaky voice. "Excuse me, sir?" The wrench slipped from his hand. Steele slid out from under the bike, wiping grease on a rag. He saw a pair of bare legs first. They were thin and pale, with dirt and grass stains on the knees. No shoes. Toes pressed into the concrete, as if the world might move without warning. His gaze traveled up, a faded t-shirt 2 sizes too big, a cardigan with one missing sleeve, hair that had been brushed in a hurry and then forgotten. The girl looked about 9, maybe 10. Her eyes were huge and glossy, like she was holding back a flood by sheer will. Behind her, the wind pushed the door a little wider. Outside, traffic hummed on the highway, oblivious. The whole shop went quiet. "Hey, little one," Steele said softly, his voice deeper than the engines around him. "You lost?" She shook her head. Her fingers dug into the hem of her shirt. "Did somebody drop you off here?" Another biker, Torch, asked. He tried to make his voice light, but something about the way she held herself made his stomach knot. She took a breath like it hurt. Then the words came out in a broken whisper that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I can't close my legs." No one moved. The world seemed to tilt. For a heartbeat, all the chrome, leather, and gasoline smell vanished. All that existed was a little girl who had just said something no child should ever have to say. Before we go any further, if that one sentence already put a knot in your stomach, you're exactly who this story is for. Take a second to hit like so more people hear stories where the ones in leather are the ones doing the right thing. And do me a favor. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Living room TV, truck cab, or just your phone in the kitchen, so we know who's riding with us tonight. Steele didn't curse, didn't shout. He just felt a cold, familiar anger creep up his spine like an old ghost. He had heard those words before. Not the exact ones, but the meaning, the tone. The way a child's voice could sound like it had lived 3 lifetimes already. He knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he saw what the fluorescent lights had missed. The stiff way she stood, the way she flinched when the wind pushed the door, the faint bruising under the edge of her cardigan. "What's your name?" he asked, as gently as a man with knuckles like his could. "Ava," she whispered. "My name is Ava." "Okay, Ava," he said. "My name's Steele. Nobody's gonna touch you in here. Do you understand me?" She swallowed hard and gave the smallest nod. Behind him, the bikers shifted. Men with skull patches on their backs suddenly looked like they were afraid to breathe, as if any movement might shatter her. Steele held out his hand. "Come sit down. You want some water? Something to drink?" She hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. It was cold. Too cold. As he led her to the beat-up couch in the corner, the others looked at each other. Years of bar fights, road rage, and bad decisions had not prepared them for this moment. Fueler, the quiet one with reading glasses perched on his nose, muttered under his breath, "Oh God." Clip, the prospect, hovered near the door, watching the empty road as if some monster might come racing after her. Steele sat Ava down, grabbed an old blanket from the back, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You hurt anywhere, sweetheart?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't answer. Her fingers twisted the blanket like she was trying to disappear into it. Steele's chest tightened. He had seen busted faces, broken arms, knife wounds. Those he knew what to do with. You slap on a bandage, you drive them to the ER, you crack a joke to keep them awake. But this was different. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Ava's voice trembled. "If I tell, he said nobody will believe me. He said they'll take me away and put me somewhere worse." "Who said that?" Torch asked, failing to keep the growl out of his tone. Ava's lip quivered. "Mom's boyfriend. He's a police officer." That sentence hit the room like a brick through glass. Torch swore under his breath. Fueler closed his eyes. Even the radios in the background seemed to go silent. Steele felt something he hadn't felt in years, the old helpless rage from his own childhood, when grown-ups had cold eyes and polite smiles, and nobody believed the scared boy in the corner. He forced his voice to stay calm. "Okay, Ava, listen to me." He spoke slowly, as if every word was a promise carved in stone. "You did the right thing coming here. I don't care who he is. I don't care what badge he wears. We believe you. Do you understand?" A tear finally escaped and ran down her cheek. "You do?" Steele nodded once. "Yeah, we do. And we're going to make sure you're safe." He stood and turned to his brothers. "Get the van," he said. "We're going to the hospital." Torch frowned. "You sure about taking her there first? If she's hurt," Steele cut him off. "A doctor documents it. And once it's in the system, it can't just go away because somebody has a friend at City Hall." He stared at them, his eyes hard but steady. "We do this by the book. All the way. No shortcuts, no cowboy stuff. Not yet." The men nodded. They didn't like it. But they trusted him. Steele looked back at Ava. "You up for a ride, sweetheart? It's only a few minutes away." She wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand and nodded again. On any other day, the sight of a little girl climbing into a van surrounded by Hell's Angels might have drawn every phone camera in town. Today, nobody noticed. And that was the town's first mistake. The local hospital was small, the kind of place that patched up broken arms and dealt with heart attacks, but sent anything complicated to the city an hour away. The automatic doors hissed open as Steele carried Ava in his arms. She had clung to him as if the ground might disappear. Nurses at the front desk glanced up, their eyes widening at the sight of a heavily tattooed biker with a child in his arms. But training overcame instinct. "What happened?" one of them asked, standing quickly. Steele didn't try to soften it. "She's hurt. She says she was harmed at home. We need a doctor, now." The nurse's eyes shifted to Ava's face. Whatever she saw there erased any doubt. "Get Dr. Hayes," she called out. "Right now." Ava was taken back to an exam room. A pediatric nurse with gentle hands spoke to her in a soft voice, explaining every step before it happened. Steele waited outside the door like a guard dog, pacing the hallway, ignoring the stairs. Torch sat in a plastic chair, foot bouncing. Clip leaned against the wall, fists clenched at his sides. Fuller was at the registration desk, providing information, answering questions. Yes, we're with the local Hells Angels chapter. No, we're not her relatives. Yes, we'll stay available for questions. No, none of us is armed right now. An hour passed, then another. Every tick of the clock scraped across Steele's nerves. Finally, Dr. Hayes stepped out. She was in her early 50s, with lines around her eyes that said she'd seen too much and slept too little. Steele straightened. Well? She glanced around, lowered her voice. I can't share details, she said carefully, but I can tell you this. She's not making it up. There are injuries that no child should ever have. Torch swore under his breath, turning away to put a hand on his face. Dr. Hayes continued, her voice tight. I'm mandated to report this. The hospital's calling Child Protective Services and the police. They'll send an officer and a social worker to interview her. Steele's jaw flexed. The man she's accusing is law enforcement. The doctor's eyes darkened. I heard. Does that change anything? He asked. It shouldn't, she replied. But I've worked in this town a long time, Mr. People call me Steele. Mr. Steele, she said, almost smiling. There are a lot of things that shouldn't happen that still do. That's why we document everything. Whatever comes next, these records are real. They exist. That matters. He gave a short nod. Thank you, doctor. 2 hours later, CPS finally arrived. A young social worker with a tablet and tired eyes introduced herself as Ms. Carter. She glanced at the bikers with visible unease. I'll speak with her alone, she said, as if warning them off. Steele didn't fight it. Just listen to her, he replied. Really listen. Not like she's another file. Among the last to show up was an officer from the department. Not the one Ava feared, but a colleague. He stood with Ms. Carter in a tiny family room off the hallway. Steele and 2 of his men were allowed inside. The rest waited out by the vending machines. Ava sat huddled in the corner of a couch, blanket around her shoulders, a cup of cocoa untouched on the table. Ms. Carter turned on her tablet. Ava, can you tell us what happened? Ava's eyes flicked to Steele for strength, then back. She spoke slowly, haltingly. Not every detail. Just enough. Enough that the officer's hand went to his mouth. Enough that Ms. Carter's throat bobbed as she swallowed back tears. Has he hurt you before? Ms. Carter asked. Ava nodded. Did you tell your mom? She said, he's under a lot of stress, Ava whispered. She said if I keep lying, they'll take me away. And he'll lose his job, and it'll be my fault, and then nobody will want me. Steele closed his eyes for a moment. Ms. Carter took a breath. Okay, Ava. You did the right thing telling us. We're going to review this and make sure you're safe. For tonight, you'll stay here at the hospital. You're not going home with him. A tiny bit of tension left Ava's shoulders. Can I go with them? She asked, glancing at Steele. Ms. Carter's eyes hardened for a moment. No, sweetheart. They're not your family. We have procedures. We're safer than the guy she ran from, Torch muttered too loudly. The officer shot him a look. Not helping. They left Ava in a pediatric room that was designed to look cheerful, with cartoon animals on the walls. It didn't help much. In the hallway, Ms. Carter closed her tablet. We'll open a case. We'll interview the mother. We'll interview the accused. We'll assign a guardian ad litem. It takes time. How much time? Steele asked. Usually an initial review within 72 hours, she said. Then there may be a temporary placement, depending on risk. 72 hours? Torch repeated, incredulous. You heard what she just said. I heard, Ms. Carter replied, the strain showing on her face. But the law says... Steele cut in, his voice low but intense. What does the law say about sending a child back to a house where she's terrified to sleep? Ms. Carter opened her mouth, then closed it again. I don't make the laws, she said quietly. I operate inside them. Later that evening, another officer arrived. Not in uniform. In plain clothes, with too familiar confidence. Ava's mother. She walked down the hallway with practiced indignation, makeup slightly smeared, hair frizzed from the rushed drive. When she saw Steele and his men, she flinched. What are they doing here? She demanded. Is this some kind of joke? Steele didn't bother answering. Carter stepped between them, trying to mediate, trying to stay calm. Voices rose. Blame flew. The phrase, "My boyfriend's a good man," was repeated more than once. In the end, policies spoke louder than fear. That night, Ava stayed at the hospital under observation. Ms. Carter assured them that she would not be released to anyone without CPS sign-off. We have it under control, she said. Steele wanted to believe her. The next morning, he called Child Protective Services. The call rang, transferred, held, and then dropped. He called again, left a voicemail. No answer. He called the non-emergency police line. They transferred him to a detective who was out on another case. He drove to the station, waited in the lobby. A receptionist told him, politely, that everything was being handled according to procedure. By the second day, Ava had been moved. Not back home. Not yet. To a temporary foster placement with a family the county worked with. A holding spot. Is it safe? Steele pressed. Do you know them? They've been vetted, the receptionist said, eyes sliding away. He walked out into the sunlight, feeling more helpless than he had the day his own childhood case file was closed with the words, "No further action." At the clubhouse that night, the men gathered in their usual church, a circle of folding chairs around a scarred wooden table in the back room. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and anger. I don't like this, Torch said. We drop her off, we do everything by the book, and now she's just somewhere we can't see? Maybe the system will actually work this time, Fuller said without conviction. Steele stared at the table, tracing a knife scratch with his thumb. You ever seen it work like it should? He asked quietly. No one answered. On the far wall, a small TV played local news on mute. A familiar face appeared on the screen. A police officer in uniform, Ava's mother standing beside him, smiling tightly. A banner at the bottom read, Local officer denies allegations, calls claims malicious lies. Torch grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. It breaks my heart that anyone would accuse me of such things, the officer was saying, his voice smooth, his eyes appropriately moist. I've served this community for 12 years. These rumors are hurting my family, my career, and the trust between law enforcement and our citizens. The anchor nodded sympathetically. Not once did they show a picture of Ava. Not once did they say her name. Not once did they mention the hospital records. Steele felt his jaw grinding. On the screen, the officer continued. We're cooperating fully with the investigation, but I want to be clear. These claims are false, and I will be cleared. The segment ended with the anchor thanking him for his service. The TV went silent again. They already picked a side, Torch said, and it's not hers. Steele stood up slowly. Tomorrow, he said, we're going to start finding out exactly who we're up against. The next week taught the Hells Angels more about bureaucracy than they ever wanted to know. Fuller set up in the clubhouse with a cheap laptop, a pot of coffee, and a determination that surprised even him. He dug through public records, court cases, complaints, and news archives. What he found wasn't a smoking gun. It was something worse. A pattern. 3 years ago, a teenage boy had made a vague complaint about inappropriate behavior from a family friend who just happened to be a decorated officer. The report had gone nowhere. Insufficient evidence. 5 years ago, a neighbor had called about hearing screaming and strange sounds late at night from the officer's house. The responding officer had been his partner. The call was marked unfounded. There were gaps, too. Times when Ava's family had moved unexpectedly. Times when school records indicated behavioral problems from a quiet, shy girl who suddenly wouldn't participate in gym class. None of it proved anything by itself, but together it painted a picture no one wanted to look at. Steele and Torch went to the CPS office, wearing their least intimidating clothes. It didn't help much. The waiting room was full of anxious parents, bored kids, and overworked staff. Posters on the walls said things like, "Every child deserves safety," and "If you see something, say something." Steele had seen plenty. He had said something. He had the hospital on his side. And still, nothing moved. When they finally got a meeting with Ms. Carter, her eyes were even more exhausted than before. "How's Ava?" Steele asked. Ms. Carter hesitated. "I can't share details about placements." "We're not asking for an address," Torch said. "We just want to know. Is she okay?" Ms. Carter looked between them. Her voice lowered. "She's scared. She misses her mom. She alternates between wanting to go home and begging not to. She has nightmares. She's confused why everyone keeps asking her to repeat the worst things that ever happened to her." Steele's fists clenched at his sides. "The accused has retained an attorney," Ms. Carter went on. "They're claiming she was coached, that the injuries could have another explanation. The mother supports him. They're presenting a united front." "A united front of who?" Torch snapped. "A cop? His girlfriend and their PR team?" "Calm down," Ms. Carter said wearily. "There will be a hearing. A judge will weigh in, but it won't be tomorrow." "Is she going back there?" Steele asked. Ms. Carter swallowed. "The recommendation from our office is that she should not. But judges don't always follow recommendations. They have discretion." Outside the building, the sky was a flat, indifferent gray. Wind pushed trash across the parking lot. Torch kicked a stone hard enough to send it skittering under a car. "This is insane," he said. "If this were some guy with a dead-end job and a rusted Buick, they'd have yanked that kid out in a heartbeat." Steele leaned against his bike, staring at nothing. "You ever think," he said slowly, "about when you were a kid and you told someone something and they looked at you like you were breaking their favorite toy?" Torch glanced at him, thrown by the sudden shift. "You talking about you or her?" Steele shrugged one shoulder. "Does it matter?" At the clubhouse that night, church was more than just an agenda. It was a moral trial. Steele laid out what they knew. The hospital records, the patterns, the officer's TV appearance, the slow churn of CPS, the upcoming hearing that could send Ava back to the man she had run from. "We can't just sit here," Torch said. "If they send her back, we'll have to live knowing we watched it happen." Fuller pushed his glasses up. "We started this by doing the right thing," he said. "We took her to the hospital. We called CPS. We didn't go kicking in doors. That matters." "And what good did it do?" Torch shot back. Fuller looked at Steele. "If we go rogue now," he said, "we hand them exactly what they want. See? These bikers are dangerous vigilantes. That poor officer was just trying to live his life. They'll use us as the villain in his story." Steele listened, eyes closed for a moment. He remembered being 12, sitting in a hallway outside a courtroom, while adults whispered over his head. He remembered the day the case was closed because witness credibility was in question. His mother had hugged the man who had hurt him. The man walked free. Steele had learned something important that day. Sometimes monsters wore suits. Sometimes heroes had criminal records. "Let's run this straight," Steele said at last, "all the way to the edge of the law. And if the law stops before justice does, then we'll decide who we are." They started with lawyers. Most of them wanted nothing to do with a case that put them up against local law enforcement. Some sympathized, but backed away. A few quoted retainers higher than the roof of the clubhouse. Finally, they found one. Her name was Teresa Blake. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, a reputation for taking cases other attorneys avoided. She met them in a cramped office above a pawn shop, surrounded by stacks of files. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that a little girl ran to you, said she was being abused by a cop, the hospital found injuries, CPS confirmed concern, and yet everyone is moving like it's paperwork, not a fire?" "That about sums it up," Torch said. "And you're Hell's Angels," she noted, looking at Steele. "Local chapter," he replied evenly. "We're not choir boys, but we're not liars about something like this." Teresa folded her hands. "I believe you," she said. "But belief isn't evidence. We need to get eyes in that courtroom. We need to get someone speaking for her who isn't on the department's Christmas card list." "Can you do that?" Steele asked. She gave a tight smile. "I can try. I can file motions, request that her testimony be heard in a safe setting, push for an independent evaluator. But I'll tell you something you're not going to like." She leaned forward. "He's not the one on trial. She is. They'll question her memory, her motives, her sanity. They'll drag her through hell and call it due process." "So what do we do?" Fuller asked. "Everything we can," Teresa replied, "and nothing we can't take back." In the weeks that followed, the town changed. Not in obvious ways. The grocery store still ran specials on canned soup. The diner still served coffee that tasted like burnt history. The church bells still rang. But the conversations shifted. Some people lowered their voices when the officer's name came up. Some shook their heads and said, "Kids these days make things up." Others frowned and said, "My cousin knew a girl who," and then trailed off, looking over their shoulders. The Hells Angels found themselves under a spotlight they hadn't asked for. They were followed more often, pulled over for routine checks that lasted far too long. Code enforcement suddenly cared about old violations on the clubhouse. A neighbor reported suspicious activity every time more than 2 bikes were parked outside. Steele's phone buzzed constantly, calls from Teresa, from Fuller, from reporters looking for a soundbite. He refused them all. This wasn't about them. It was about a child somewhere in the system, waiting to see if the adults around her would choose comfort over truth. The hearing was set for a rainy Thursday morning. That was the day the line between law and justice finally snapped. Rain came down in sheets, turning the courthouse steps into a slick hazard. Umbrellas bloomed like flowers in bad weather colors. Reporters stood near the entrance, doing their best serious faces for the camera. Steele and a few of his men stood back under the eave of a neighboring building, watching. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to bear witness. A county van pulled up. Ava stepped out with a caseworker. She wore a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit, her hair pulled back too tightly. She looked smaller than Steele remembered, as if the time away had shrunk her. The officer and her mother arrived a few minutes later, walking up the steps together. He was in a suit this time, not a uniform, but his stride carried the same confidence. Her mother kept touching his arm, like she was convincing herself as much as the cameras. Inside, the hallway was a maze of cheap carpet and fluorescent lights. Steele sat on a bench at the end of the corridor, close enough to feel the tension, far enough that no one could accuse him of interfering. He watched as lawyers and social workers went in and out of the family courtroom. Ava disappeared behind a closed door. The officer and his attorney followed. Time stretched. When the courtroom door opened again, Teresa came out looking angry in a quiet, controlled way Steele had already learned to respect. "What happened?" Steele asked. "The judge allowed the officer's attorney to question Ava directly," Teresa said. "In open court. No separate room, no shield. She sat there, feet barely touching the floor, and they treated her like a hostile witness." Steele's vision tunneled. "Did the judge review the hospital reports?" he asked. "He skimmed them," Teresa replied. "Said there were alternate explanations for some of the injuries. The officer's attorney suggested she bruises easily, suggested she confused accidents with abuse, suggested she might have been influenced by you." "By us?" Torch repeated. "They implied you encouraged her story," Teresa said. "That you told her what to say." Steele stood up. "So what now?" "Now," Teresa said bitterly, "we wait for the judge's decision. He recessed for an hour, but I heard enough between the lines to know which way the wind is blowing." An hour later, the gale hit. The judge returned to the bench. People shuffled back into the small courtroom. Steele stayed outside, but the door was thin and sound traveled. He heard the words, "Insufficient evidence. Possibility of coaching. Recommend reunification with mother and her partner under supervision. Dismiss pending further substantiation." Torch's knuckles went white against the bench. When Ava walked out of the courtroom, her face was blank. Her foster caseworker's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Behind them, her mother smiled with relief. The officer looked straight ahead. A reporter's microphone appeared. "Do you have any comment on the judge's decision?" The officer gave a performance-worthy sigh of gratitude. "I'm just glad the truth is coming out," he said. "I never doubted the system." Steele heard enough. That evening, he sat alone in the darkened clubhouse. The neon bar sign buzzed faintly. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air feeling scrubbed but not clean. On the table in front of him was a photo. It was a cheap printout that Fuller had made from hospital records, a copy of Ava's face at intake, eyes swollen from crying, cheeks streaked, a bruise at her temple barely visible. But there. He remembered her small voice. "I can't close my legs." The system, once again, had decided that paperwork weighed more than a child's fear. Steele reached for his phone and dialed. Torch answered on the second ring. "Yeah?" "Church," Steele said. "Now." Within 30 minutes, the core members were there. They didn't joke, didn't spread out. They sat close, like men huddled around a problem older than all of them. Steele didn't waste time. "The judge sent her back," he said. "Under supervision. You and I both know what that means when the person being supervised carries a badge." Torch slammed his fist lightly into his knee. "So what? We just wait until there's a body?" Fuller spoke up quietly. "There's something else," he said. "I checked the department schedule. He's working nights this week. Graveyard shift. That leaves her alone with him when Mom's at work." The room went cold. Steele looked around the circle. "We've done it their way," he said. "We've done every single thing they tell people to do. We took her to the hospital. We called CPS. We got a lawyer. We sat in their courtroom. We watched them send her back to the same house." His voice dropped, heavy. "If something happens to her now, her blood's not just on his hands, it's on ours. Because we knew, and we sat here polishing chrome while they called it insufficient evidence." Torch met his eyes. "What are you saying?" Steele took a breath. I'm saying there's a line between breaking the law and betraying your own soul. I'm not sure the law is on the right side of that line right now. Fueler rubbed his temples. You realize what you're talking about could put you away for a long time. Steele nodded. I do. That's why I'm not ordering anything. I'm asking. You want out, you walk. No hard feelings. But I'm not going to sit here and wait for news that a little girl we promised to protect didn't make it through the night. The room was silent. One by one, hands went up. Torch, Fueler, Clip. The others. No one left. Steele nodded once. Then here's the line, he said. We don't hurt him. Not unless we have no choice. We don't brand this with our patch. This isn't about reputation. This is about one kid. We get her out of that house and into somewhere safe. If I have to sit in a cell afterward, I can live with that better than I can live with a grave. They planned quietly. They knew the officers' shifts. They knew Ava's school hours. They knew the layout of the house from property records. The night they chose was overcast, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Streetlights cast pale cones on empty sidewalks. Most of the town lulled itself to sleep with streaming shows and the illusion that everything was fine. Steele parked a block away, walking the rest of the distance with Torch. Fueler stayed with the van, ready to drive the second they were back. They weren't in cuts. No patches. Just dark clothes and baseball caps. Two middle-aged men who could have been anyone in the wrong neighborhood. Through the living room window, they saw the flicker of a TV. Ava's mother sat on the couch, scrolling her phone. No sign of him. He was at work, like the schedule said. Steele knocked. After a moment, the door opened on a chain. Her mother peered out, eyes narrowing when she recognized him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "We want to check on Ava," Steele said calmly, "just to see how she's doing." "She doesn't need you," the woman snapped. "You've already caused enough trouble." Behind her, down the hallway, a small shadow appeared. Ava. She peered around the corner, eyes wide. "Is he home?" Steele asked, keeping his tone level. "No," the mother said. "He's at work. Unlike some people, he has a real job." Steele met Ava's gaze. He saw the flinch, the way her hand went to her own arm, as if remembering something. "I just want to talk to her for a minute," Steele said. "At the door, nothing more." "You're not coming near her," the mother hissed. The judge said a lot of things," Steele replied quietly. "Some of us still remember what she said." The woman tried to slam the door, but Torch reached out and caught it before it could close. A tense silence stretched. "Let go of my door," she said, voice thin with anger. Steele's voice softened, but his eyes stayed hard. "Do you really think this is going to get better?" he asked. "You really think this ends with a perfect family picture and a Christmas card from the chief? Or do you know, somewhere deep down, that you're gambling with your daughter's life because you're afraid to start over?" The woman's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. "Get off my porch," she whispered. Behind her, Ava spoke. Her voice was small, but it cut through the tension like glass. "Mom," she said, "I don't want him to come back." Her mother flinched as if struck. "You don't know what you're saying," the woman snapped. "I do," Ava replied, her eyes not leaving Steele's. "I don't want him to come back, ever." Sometimes a whole life turns on one sentence. The woman stood frozen, hand still on the door, chain still in place. Steele made a choice. "Ava," he said, "if you walk out this door right now, we can't promise it'll be easy. But we can promise you this. He won't touch you again. Not ever." Ava looked at her mother. Her mother looked at the floor, Slowly, with trembling hands, the woman unhooked the chain and stepped aside. "I didn't see you," she said, her voice shaking. "If anyone asks, I didn't see you." Ava ran. She clutched a small backpack, already half-packed, as if she'd been waiting for a moment that might never come. She flew into Steele's arms like she had the first day, and he caught her like he always would. Torch held the door for them, his throat tight. As they turned to go, Ava's mother whispered, "If you take her, they'll come after you." Steele paused. "If we leave her," he said, "they'll come after her." He walked down the steps, Ava clinging to him, her face buried in his shoulder. Torch glanced back. He saw the woman collapse against the doorframe, sobbing soundlessly. No sirens screamed that night. No neighbors shouted. The town was quiet as they drove away, unaware that its story had just split in two. They didn't get far. 20 miles down the highway, blue and red lights exploded in the rearview mirror. Fueler cursed under his breath and pulled the van to the shoulder. Patrol cars boxed them in front and back. An unmarked sedan slid in behind. Steele felt Ava stiffen beside him. "It's okay," he said, though he wasn't sure it was. "We're right here." Officers approached with hands near holsters, but not drawn. They knew who they were stopping. They also knew this wasn't a drug run or a bar fight. "Step out of the vehicle," one of them ordered. Steele complied, moving slowly. Torch did the same. Fueler kept his hands visible on the wheel. From the unmarked car, a man in a suit stepped out. County detective. The kind with bags under his eyes and a wedding ring groove on his finger. "Where is she?" the detective asked. Steele didn't bother lying. "In the back," he said. "Where she's going to stay." The detective sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose. "You realize what you've done, right?" he asked. "Custodial interference? Kidnapping, technically." "Kidnapping," Steele repeated quietly. "Is that what we're calling protecting a child nobody else would protect?" "There's a process," the detective said, though he didn't sound convinced even as he said it. "We used your process," Steele snapped. "Hospital, CPS, court. That process sent her back to the man she ran from. We're just rerouting." The detective glanced at the van. "Open it," he said. Fueler did. The side door slid back with a metallic groan. Ava sat on the bench seat, clutching her backpack. Her eyes were wide but steady. The detective's face softened. He walked closer, crouched a little. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "You remember me? I saw you at the station once." She nodded slightly. "I need to ask you something, okay?" he said. "Did these men force you to go with them?" Ava shook her head immediately. "No," she said. "I wanted to go. I told them I didn't want to stay there." The detective exhaled slowly. "Did anyone hurt you tonight?" he asked. She shook her head again. "They told me I'd be safe," she said. "They're the only ones who believed me." The detective looked at Steele. "You put me in a hell of a position," he muttered. "No," Steele replied. "He did. The day he touched her. The day he lied. The day he made you choose between your badge and your conscience." The detective flinched at that, just a little. "Get back in the van," he said hoarsely. Steele frowned, not understanding. The detective straightened, turned to the other officers. "Stand down," he called. "We'll handle this." "But the call," one officer started. "The call says we made contact," the detective interrupted. "We did. We're done." He glanced back at Ava, then at Steele. His voice dropped. "Make sure she's somewhere the cameras can't find for a while. And for God's sake, get a lawyer ready. 2 if you can afford them." He walked back to his car without another word. The patrol cars pulled away, one by one, like a tide turning. The van sat on the shoulder, engine idling. Inside, no one spoke. Finally, Torch let out the breath he'd been holding. "What the hell just happened?" he asked. Steele stared at the dark highway ahead. "Somebody's conscience woke up," he said quietly. That's what. They didn't go home. Teresa, always half expecting something like this, had already compiled a list of safe houses, legally gray, morally necessary, a retired social worker outside the county, a women's shelter willing to take them in under the radar, a church camp in the off-season. They chose a small cabin near a lake, owned by an old biker who owed Steele a favor from a lifetime ago. It had no Wi-Fi, no curious neighbors, and no memories attached to it. For the first time in years, Ava slept through the night. For the first time in his life, Steele didn't. Within 24 hours, the story broke. "Little girl kidnapped by notorious biker gang," one headline screamed. "Local officer target of smear campaign," another insisted. Cable commentators took sides from hundreds of miles away, telling a town they'd never visited what to think about people they'd never met. The police department called the Hellsangels dangerous criminals. The chief spoke solemnly about law and order and letting the system work. They didn't mention the hospital records. They didn't mention the CPS recommendations. They didn't mention the detective who had quietly stepped aside on the highway. Teresa went to work like a storm in heels. She turned the narrative on its head, filing motions, calling press conferences, leaking documents showing the pattern of ignored complaints. "This isn't kidnapping," she told a bank of microphones. "This is a last resort. This is what happens when a child screams into a system that covers its ears." The town split down the middle. Some people called Steele a monster. Others called him the only man who did what needed to be done. Church pews buzzed with whispers. The diner's coffee counter became a makeshift debate stage. Friendships cracked. Lines were drawn. When the case finally went to trial, the courtroom was packed. Steele sat at the defendant's table, wearing a plain shirt, no leather, no patch. His hands were cuffed. He held his head up. The prosecutor painted him as a lawless thug who thought he knew better than the court. "If everyone who disagrees with the judge grabs a child and runs," the prosecutor argued, "we don't have a society. We have chaos." Teresa let him finish. Then she stood. "You're right," she said calmly. "If everyone did what Mr. Steele did, it would be chaos. But let me ask you, how many of you have had a child look you in the eye and say, 'I can't close my legs,' and then watched a judge send her back to the man she accused? How many of you have seen the paperwork, the bruises, the fear? How many of you have lived with what happens when you do nothing?" She turned to the jury, a cross-section of the town, men and women with mortgages, aging parents, and regrets of their own. "This case isn't about whether my client broke the law," she said. "He did. The law is very clear. The question you have to answer is simpler and harder. Was he wrong?" When Ava took the stand, the room held its breath. She sat on a cushion so she could reach the microphone. She wore a simple dress and a small bracelet one of the biker's girlfriends had given her for luck. Teresa asked gentle questions. Ava spoke softly but clearly. She told them why she ran to the clubhouse that day. She told them how long she had been afraid. She told them what it felt like to see her abuser on television, smiling, while everyone talked about his career and not about her pain. "Why did you go with them that night?" Teresa asked. "When they came to your house?" Ava looked over at Steele, then back at the jury. "Because nobody else came," she said. Silence fell heavy in the room. The prosecutor tried to shake her, suggested she had been influenced, suggested she didn't understand the seriousness of what she was saying. Ava's hands trembled, but her eyes did not waver. "He said nobody would believe me," she said. "He was almost right." The jury went out to deliberate. They were gone for hours. In that time, the town outside stewed. Social media boiled. Talk radio howled. Inside a small, silent room, 12 people wrestled with something the law books didn't cover: the space between right and legal. When they finally returned, Steele stood. The foreman cleared his throat, his voice rough. "On the charge of custodial interference in the first degree," he read, "we find the defendant not guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "On the charge of kidnapping in the second degree," the foreman continued, "we find the defendant not guilty." The sound that followed wasn't a cheer. It was a collective exhale, a release of pressure the town hadn't known it was holding. The judge banged his gavel for order. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes flicked to Ava for a fraction of a second. The officer who had been accused was not on trial that day. Not officially. But in the silent looks that followed him down Main Street, in the empty booths around him at the diner, in the way parents pulled their kids closer when he walked by, he felt his own verdict. It would take more time, more evidence, and more pressure before the state would open a case against him. But the town had already made up its mind. In the months that followed, life didn't go back to normal. There was no normal to return to. Ava didn't move back home. Her mother, facing her own slow awakening to the truth, entered counseling, support groups, and a late but desperate attempt at being the parent her daughter deserved. Ava went to live with a foster family that actually wanted her, a couple in their 50s with a quiet house, a dog that adored her, and no interest in being on the evening news. She still came by the clubhouse sometimes. Not often. Not enough to make people nervous. Just enough to remind the men there why they kept doing toy drives and charity runs long after their knees begged them to retire. She would sit on the same beat-up couch, legs crossed comfortably now, drawing in an old notebook, while the men argued over carburetors and baseball. They never asked her for details. They never made her tell the story again. They just made sure she knew one thing. If she ever needed to run again, she had somewhere to run to. Steele went back to fixing bikes and paying bills. The trial had cost him money, time, and years off his life he'd never get back. Some nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the moment on that highway when one detective had chosen to push his conscience ahead of his career. Other nights, he remembered being 12 again, and wished someone back then had been willing to risk handcuffs for him. He wasn't a hero. He didn't want to be. He was just a man who had decided that his soul was worth more than his record. The town changed, too. Quietly. Anonymous tip lines saw more calls. Mandatory reporter trainings filled up. Judges learned to look a little longer at hospital reports before calling injuries ambiguous. And somewhere in the state capitol, a bill was introduced. It didn't have Ava's name on it. Not officially. But people whispered it under their breath when they talked about it. The law made it harder for authorities to ignore medical evidence in abuse cases. It gave children more options to testify by video, away from the gaze of their abusers. It limited how often defense attorneys could drag them through retellings that did nothing but reopen wounds. It wasn't perfect. Nothing humans wrote ever was. But it was a start. Word about the case spread far beyond the town, not because of clickbait headlines, though there were plenty of those, but because people whispered it to each other in kitchens and break rooms. "Did you hear?" they asked, "about the little girl who ran to the bikers?" They debated it at dinner tables. "I don't like outlaw clubs," some said, "but if everyone had looked away, that kid would still be alone." Others shrugged. If the system worked like it's supposed to, nobody would ever have to make that choice. Steele didn't care about the debates. He cared about the day, a year after the trial, when a letter showed up at the clubhouse. The envelope was covered in stickers. The handwriting was crooked but determined. He opened it with hands that had seen too much. Inside was a drawing. It showed a little girl standing between two big motorcycles. Her legs were straight, her feet firmly planted. One of the bikes had a small heart drawn on the gas tank. Underneath, in careful letters, was a single sentence. "Thank you for believing me when nobody else did." Steele stared at it for a long time. Then he pinned it to the clubhouse wall, right above the door, where every member would see it each time they walked in or out. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the line between right and wrong doesn't match the ink on the law books. A reminder that doing the right thing can cost you. A reminder that the world is full of kids whose stories never reach the news, whose knocks on doors go unanswered. And a reminder that, once in a while, in a town that would rather stay comfortable than honest, someone with a stained reputation and a loud engine might be the only one who hears them. The town never held a parade for Steele. No mayor handed him a key to the city. Most days, he preferred it that way. But there were moments, small, quiet ones, that said enough. The way an old woman at the grocery store squeezed his arm and simply said, "Good man." The way a father at the park watched his kids a little more closely than he used to. The way a young social worker requested a transfer into child protection after reading about the case, telling her supervisor, "I don't want to be the one who looks away." The story settled into the town's bones. People didn't talk about it every day, but they carried it with them. And somewhere, in a house with a dog and a yard, and no locks on the outside of doors, Ava grew taller. Her laugh came easier. Her nightmares came less often. She would never forget what happened to her, but she would also never forget what happened after. One day, years later, she would tell a friend, "I thought the scariest people in town were those bikers. Turns out they were the only ones who looked like monsters, but acted like angels." Now, if you're hearing this story out loud, maybe in your living room, maybe on your phone, maybe on a TV that's seen better days, you're part of it too. Because somewhere, maybe not far from where you're sitting, there's a child who hasn't met their Steele yet. There's a neighbor who hears something through the wall and turns up the volume on their show instead of making a call. There's a judge flipping through a file too fast. You may never wear a patch. You may never sit on a bike thicker than your arm. But you will walk past moments where you could look away, or you could step in. And if you believe, deep down, that children deserve more than excuses, that comfort is never worth their safety, then don't let this just be a story you heard one night and forgot. Let it be a question you carry. When the knock comes on your door, literal or not, will you be the one who believes? If this story moved you, don't let it stop with you. Share it. Talk about it. Teach your kids to speak up, and teach yourself to listen when they do. And if you want more stories where the world's monsters turn out to be the ones standing between darkness and the people nobody else sees, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you hit like, and leave a comment telling where you're listening from. Because sometimes the only thing louder than a biker's engine is a town that refuses to stay silent anymore.